Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when fog hugged the streets of London like a heavy wool blanket, and gas lamps flickered against the soot-stained bricks. You walk the cobblestones, boots damp, breath curling into cool evening air, and just ahead, a shop window glows faintly, candles dancing across bolts of fabric, spools of thread. And is that a rat wearing a tiny velvet collar? You'd miss-see it. This is Victorian London. And yes, that's a real rat. His name might be Cedric or Lord Whiskerton, depending on the mood of the tailor. And you, dear traveler, are about to step into the bizarre, delightful, and mildly questionable world of forgotten pets with even more forgotten resumes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push the door open, and a little brass bell jingles with a sound like a polite sneeze. The scent of beeswax polish, and will hit you immediately. Bolts of fabric line the walls, peacock blue, mulberry, ochre, and between them, perched on high shelves and darting across the rafters, are rats. Not wild ones, not the toothy, panic kind. These are well-fed, well-groomed creatures with shiny coats and the occasional scrap of ribbon around their necks. "Welcome," says a man in a mustard-colored waistcoat. He adjusts his pince-nez and gestures toward the rats with a flick of his measuring tape. They keep me company. And the moths away. It turns out, during the mid-19th century, certain tailors in East London, especially those who worked through the night, kept rats not as pests, but as pets with purpose. These rats were raised from infancy, trained how to chew on fabrics, well, mostly, and were fed lavish diets of oat scraps, suet crumbs, and if they behaved, drops of condensed milk from a porcelain thimble. Mainstream historical fact. Rats were commonly associated with disease in the 19th century, but some working-class Londoners took a different approach. Fancy rats, bred for temperament and color, actually became something of a trend, especially after a man named Jack Black, the Queen's official rat catcher, began promoting them as pets rather than vermin. The tailor crouches beside a velvet-lined shoebox where a pair of pale-furred rats are curled like apostrophes around a spool thread. "This one," he says, scratching behind one's ear, "woke me up last week when the coal bucket caught fire." You stare. The rat yawns. These tiny creatures weren't just pets. They were mascots, night watchmen, and surprisingly effective PR tools. One tailor claimed his sales doubled when he began dressing his rats in little sashes and letting them sit in the window. "Customers liked the company," he said, "and they knew if my shop was safe for a rat in satin, it was good enough for their hemline." Quirky tidbit. At least 2 tailoring shops in Whitechapel had pet rats with official names on the books. One even had a calling card that read, "Mr. Buttons, rodent in residence, expert in whisker lengths." Whether the rodents appreciated the business titles remains unclear. As you sip a tin cup of something hot and questionably caffeinated, the tailor shares that some rats develop preferences. One would only sleep inside a folded cravat of emerald silk. Another refused to walk on wool, as though allergic to scratchiness. And some grew territorial, defending sewing kits like dragons over hordes of pins and bobbins. Historians still argue whether these pets were truly beloved companions or simply tolerated assistants who kept the moths and solitude at bay. The tailor says, leaning against his counter, "But I say this, Any animal that can fetch a thimble without chewing it is worth more than half the apprentices I've trained. You glance at a nearby rat attempting to lift a silver button twice its size, and you silently agree. The atmosphere in the shop is calm, despite the occasional squeak or scuffle overhead. There's something rhythmic about the soft snip of scissors, the whir of a treadle machine, and the occasional scamper of paws across the floorboards. The rats, strange as it is, complete the space. You imagine yourself living this way, hemming sleeves under a golden gas lamp while a rat in a bow tie naps beside your elbow. Somehow, it feels less bizarre with every passing moment. Eventually, the tailor lifts a small, handwritten ledger from beneath his counter. On one of the pages is a scrawled entry: thread 3 pence, buttons 5 pence, whiskers clean, no charge. You point at it. He winks. Before you leave, the tailor hands you a folded slip of blue silk. Inside is a single, perfectly clean rat whisker tied with red thread. For luck, he says. You're not sure if it's the steam from your drink or the flicker of candlelight, but the whisker almost glows. As you step back out into the night, the city feels a little more alive, like you know a secret. Somewhere above, a rat in a velvet collar watches you go, and for the briefest second, it salutes. Your boots crunch softly against the damp cobblestones as you follow a winding alley lit by flickering lanterns and the occasional candle stub stuck into a bottleneck. London at night smells like smoke and mystery, and just a hint of cheese, which is concerning in a non-dairy alley. You pause beneath a crooked wooden sign that reads, "The Hound's Respite, EST 1842, custom messages delivered by K9." The door creaks open before you even knock, and a bell above it jingles faintly, though the sound is oddly melodic, more like a chime than a clatter. Inside, the walls are lined with cubbies, each one labeled with names like Percival, Brutus, or Lady Toffee. At the back of the room stands a tall woman in a russet cloak, her gray braid tied with bits of ribbon. She's inspecting a rolled parchment tied to a dog collar. "You're just in time," she says without looking up. "Brutus is about to go on his midnight run. Best messenger I've got, and no patience for excuses." You blink as a large bloodhound plods into view, wearing a tiny satchel and a very serious expression. Mainstream historical fact. During the Victorian era, messenger dogs were employed in various ways, from military posts to noble households, but there are scattered records of them also being used in cities like London to carry small messages and parcels across neighborhoods. It wasn't widespread, but in crowded or dangerous areas, dogs could move faster and with less suspicion. You watch as the woman fits the parchment snugly in Brutus's pouch. She leans down and whispers something in his floppy ear. He huffs, clearly understanding, and trots off with the deliberate grace of a civil servant who knows he's underpaid. "That one," she sighs, "once delivered a love poem from Clerkenwell to Soho and back before the ink even dried." You ask if people ever worried about the messages being stolen. "Of course," she replies, handing you a small biscuit shaped like a paw print. "That's why some dogs were trained to snarl on cue. Others just look too sad to be robbed." You imagine a pickpocket coming face to face with a forlorn pug and immediately rethinking his life choices. The woman opens a drawer and reveals a collection of collars, some embroidered with monograms, others with brass tags etched with cryptic notes like "to Miss C, if moonlight permits." She explains that each dog had their preferred route, their rivalries, their particular favorite postbox to mark as their own. Quirky tidbit. One dog, a terrier named Nimble, reportedly refused to deliver messages to houses painted green due to a single incident involving a cat in a cravat. His owner had to repaint the exterior of the recipient's house just to maintain the correspondence. You wander through the shop, admiring sketches of past canine employees. There's Marmalade the Whippet, who specialized in delicate pastries, Hercule the Mastiff, who could carry up to 8 letters in a single run, and Buttons, a spaniel known for getting distracted by piano music and occasionally returning with completely unrelated mail. Historians still argue whether this dog post trend was a functional system or just a delightful, chaotic novelty. The woman says, stroking the ears of a snoozing beagle in a tartan sweater. But people remembered their messages more when they came with muddy paw prints. You sit in a mismatched armchair while she brews tea in a chip pot shaped like a doghouse. The walls are filled with scraps of parchment, recovered notes that were never delivered. Some are simple, be home by dusk. Others are far more cryptic. The cheese knows, act accordingly. You sip the tea, which tastes faintly of lavender and nostalgia, and watch a new pup, still in training, struggle to carry a napkin around the corner. He'll get there, the woman says, not without hope. Before you leave, she offers you a message scroll that was never claimed. It's wrapped in a faded ribbon and simply says, if found, know you are missed. You fold it gently and tuck it into your coat. Outside, the fog has thickened, and your steps sound softer somehow. You swear you hear the gentle patter of paws in the distance, small, determined feet making their way through the sleeping city. Just as you're turning a corner, a scruffy little terrier barrels past you with a red ribbon tied to its tail. It doesn't stop, doesn't even slow, just vanishes into the mist like an overworked, underpaid Victorian UPS driver. You smile. Something about this city makes even the dogs feel like old souls. The streets feel quieter now, wrapped in a hush only broken by the occasional clatter of carriage wheels in the distance or the faint hiss of coal fires. You find yourself on Swindle Street, which, despite its dubious name, smells of lavender oil and linseed. A crooked sign swings in the breeze above a narrow storefront. The Mouse Guild Rodent Workforce Solution since 1839. You squint. Surely not. But when you step inside, you're greeted by the sound of tiny gears whirring and the sharp scent of wax polish. A stooped man in a teal waistcoat peers at you over half-moon spectacles, then gestures to a series of intricate cages, each one more elaborate than the last. Apprentices, he says with pride, as a pair of mice nudge a wooden thimble across a tiny chessboard. This one's named Flannel. That one's Lord Tittlewick III. You nod politely, unsure whether to curtsy. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian London, rats and mice were sometimes trained for performance and pest control, though not exactly for organized labor. There are accounts of rat catchers using semi-trained ferrets and dogs to manage rodent populations, but few eccentric tinkers reportedly attempted to train mice for basic tasks like threading needles, sorting buttons, or fetching tiny objects. Of course, it started with curiosity, the man mutters as he adjusts a brass monocle. But then someone needed a spool of thread and couldn't bend properly due to gout. And well, Tittlewick was eager. He leads you to a workbench strewn with dollhouse-sized tools, tiny hammers, minuscule sewing needles, even a thimble turned into a helmet. On the wall behind him hangs a faded blueprint for something called the Spindle Squirrel MK2, which appears to be a mechanical loom powered by mouse-operated treadmills. Quirky tidbit. One well-documented case in 1848 involved a woman in Hackney who claimed her mice could distinguish between colors and would sort fabric scraps accordingly. Her parlor became briefly famous before the mice unionized, or more accurately, escaped. You watch as one mouse climbs a ladder made of sugar sticks and rings a small bell using a thread-tied pebble. Another scurries across a row of stacked coins, stopping only to reposition a stray button into a jar labeled Useful Ovals. How do you train them, you ask? The man looks around conspiratorially, then whispers, cheese and bedtime stories, mostly cheese. He opens a drawer and reveals a velvet-lined case of flavored crumbs, blueberry cheddar, lavender Gouda, something that smells suspiciously like regret. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate pursuit or the fevered dream of lonely tinkerers, he adds, placing a soft morsel onto a small pedestal. 3 mice immediately flock to it, like toddlers to an open cookie jar. You crouch to watch them more closely. One seems to be wearing a sash made from thread. Another drags a cork across the floor like a prize catch. You ask if they ever escape. Only once, he sighs. A week of chaos. Buttons missing. Shoelaces rearranged. We suspect they formed a rogue band near Covent Garden and began a rogue matchmaking service. They returned after realizing the city lacked proper grain storage. He lifts a ledger from beneath the workbench and flips it open to reveal carefully penned names and roles. Maribel, button sorter. Crumb, emergency stitching. Baron Nibblestone, letter opener. You blink. Letter opener? The man nods solemnly. One of our more precise lads. He gestures toward a display where a mouse is using its teeth to slice open an envelope at a diagonal. Perfectly aligned, not a millimeter off. You almost applaud. A small bell chimes again, and a pair of mice drag a walnut shell cart filled with what appears to be thread ends and postage stamps. You can't help but marvel at the craftsmanship, down to the little harnesses made of lace, the reins tied with hairs from a badger brush. You glance at a dusty corner where a faded portrait hangs. In it, a mouse perches on a top hat, monocle in one eye, holding what looks like a tea leaf. That's Sir Dandelion, the man says softly. Founder of the guild, retired in 1873 after a scandal involving a biscuit tin and a diplomatic pouch. The mice seem to be changing shifts. One wriggles into a knitted sleeve labeled on duty, while another yawns and retreats to a hammock made of silk ribbon. There's a rhythm to it, like a ballet performed by creatures with whiskers and excellent time management. As you head for the door, the man offers you a small paper cone filled with what he calls retired crumbs, nibbles made from the ends of jobs well done. They taste vaguely of thyme and toasted almonds. Outside, the air feels cooler. The stars blink above you like they've just noticed you're still awake. You hear a faint squeak near your feet, and for a moment you wonder if a message is being passed, a tiny task completed, or perhaps a button returned to its rightful pocket. You smile, imagining your laundry being sorted by tiny, cheese-powered paws. Only in Victorian London. You stroll deeper into the winding tangle of alleyways and gaslit lanes, the kind of maze only Victorian London could dream up. Damp cobblestones, wrought iron fences curling like ivy, and chimney smoke that smells vaguely of roasted parsnips and forgotten ambition. The city hums beneath your boots, an orchestra of distant hoofbeats, dripping gutters and murmuring windows. Then you hear it, a bark, not loud but dignified, followed by the sound of a bell tinkling in triplets. You turn the corner and there, beneath a crooked lantern and beside a slightly burnt pastry cart, sits a plump bulldog in a red velvet vest. Around his neck hangs a brass bell, and beside him, a sandwich board reads, Sir Basil, official night watchdog of Cheese Row. You blink. He does not. Sir Basil sniffs once, grunts, then turns away, as if your existence is noted but irrelevant. A boy in suspenders and one sock hands him a sausage wrapped in parchment. Sir Basil accepts the tribute with solemn gravity. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout the 19th century, certain neighborhoods in London employed dogs as nighttime guardians, not just for homes, but for businesses. Bakers, cheesemongers, and even bookbinders often kept watchhounds trained to patrol indoor corridors and alleyways. While many were mutts, some became minor local celebrities. You sit nearby on a damp crate, watching as Sir Basil begins his patrol. He lumbers with the grace of a sofa in motion, nose to the ground, ears flicking at every street whisper. The bell around his neck jingles just enough to let pickpockets and pigeons know they've been noticed. Quirky tidbit. One London dog named Beryl was reportedly deputized with an official city badge and tasked with protecting barrels of cheddar during the Great Cheese Heist of 1871. Though the event was mostly sensationalized, Beryl did appear in 3 penny novels and 1 cautionarium. Sir Basil pauses in front of the doorway, snorts at a stray cat, and then delicately places a paw against the door's baseboard. From inside comes a low groan and the unmistakable sound of someone hiding an empty cheese wrapper. "He's got a nose for guilt," says the boy from earlier, who has appeared beside you without warning. Caught 3 black market fondue rings this winter alone. You raise your eyebrows. The boy nods gravely. It gets real out here. Gruyere doesn't guard itself. A fog begins to roll in, soft and slow like a sleepy sigh. Sir Basil vanishes briefly into it, only the brass bell betraying his location. He reemerges moments later, now dragging a burlap sack that smells suspiciously of camembert and poor decisions. He confiscates. The boy explains, "We log every item and donate it to the orphanage's Fondue Friday." Sir Basil stops again, this time in front of a cheese stall shuttered for the night. He sits, looks upward, and emits a single gruff woof. A curtain twitches above. Moments later, a grumpy-looking woman leans out with a wedge of cheddar wrapped in cloth. She tosses it down like it's a treaty offering. He catches it without breaking eye contact. Historians still argue whether dogs like Sir Basil were truly effective deterrents or simply beloved mascots draped in myth and well-fitted vests. What is clear, however, is that their presence offered a curious mix of security, ceremony, and companionship to neighborhoods otherwise lit by flickering gaslight and the occasional cabbage thief. Sir Basil returns to his crate and circles exactly 3 times before flopping down with a huff. The boy places a tiny cup of warm broth beside him, muttering, "For digestion." Sir Basil slurps once and closes his eyes, clearly off duty now. You glance at the sandwich board again. On the back, in ornate lettering, it reads, "If found sleeping, please do not disturb. Cheese dreams in progress." You smile. Then, from down the lane, you hear the distinct patter of claws on stone. A slender greyhound appears, wearing a sash that reads Courier Class, Urgent Dairy. A small pouch is strapped to its side. You barely get a wave and before it's gone, vanishing into fog like a lactose-fueled ghost. You stand, stretch, and glance once more at Sir Basil, now softly snoring with his jowls twitching toward whatever dreams a cheese guardian has. You hope it involves rivers of melted cheddar and the gentle applause of adoring marmots. As you head away from Cheese Row, your footsteps fall into rhythm with the fading bell chime behind you. The air feels warmer somehow, like the city is starting to trust you. You walk on, deeper into a night filled with sleepy dogs and stranger tales. The fog curls tighter as you head east, trailing through alleyways with names too faded to pronounce and chimneys that wheeze like old men with secrets. Your boots make soft echoes against the bricks, and you swear the lamplight flickers just a little brighter every time you hesitate. Then you hear it, the rapid tap-tap-tap of claws on wood. You round a corner and nearly trip over a squirrel in a bonnet. It freezes. You freeze. You both blink. And then the squirrel darts up a nearby signpost, squeaking indignantly. That's when you see the banner strung across the alley entrance. Rodent Post, Express Division, ST 1842. Below it stands a narrow wooden shack with a series of little shelves, miniature mailbags, and what appears to be a cheese-based reward system. A small woman in a woolen shawl and far too many keys around her waist wave you in. "You're lucky," she says. "We just switched over to the night shift." She gestures toward a series of wooden tubes running along the walls and out into the darkness beyond. Inside each motion, tiny, bushy-tailed, beady-eyed motion, mainstream historical fact. In parts of Victorian London where streets were too narrow for carts or too muddy for reliable passage, some enterprising couriers experimented with trained rodents, particularly squirrels and ferrets, to deliver light messages and items. It never fully replaced traditional systems, but for a brief, strange period, Squirrel Post was a real experiment in micrologistics. A nearby ferret, wearing what looks like a velvet cravat, stretches, yawns, and sniffs a wax-sealed envelope labeled Urgent, Stilton recipe enclosed. The attendant pats it affectionately, tucks the letter in a pouch around its middle, and gives it a tiny push through one of the wooden tubes. You watch, dumbfounded, as the ferret disappears with a rustle and a squeak. The woman chuckles. "Don't worry, they're unionized now. Better hours, fewer cobblestones." You wander past a rack of tiny jackets, squirrel size, of course, embroidered with initials like BWS and Squeaksworth III. Above them hangs a yellowed photograph of a squirrel in a monocle, perched on a stack of telegrams. "That's Chestnut Charles," the woman says proudly. "He once delivered a truce between two rival cheesemongers. Ran straight through a thunderstorm to do it, bless him." Quirky tidbit. In 1865, a brief public sensation erupted when a squirrel named Tuppence successfully delivered 3 pieces of high-priority correspondence across the Thames, including one addressed to Queen Victoria's footman. The papers hailed her as the rodent Mercury, though she later retired to Sussex and ate nothing but walnuts for 5 years. You lean in closer to inspect a painted map marked with rodent routes. Tiny paw prints crisscross neighborhoods: Cheese Row, Jamley Court, Bunyan Square. Some are labeled confirmed safe. Others, beware, cats. The woman taps the edge of the table. You know, historians still argue whether the whole system ever truly functioned, or if it was all an elaborate game played by eccentric librarians and cheese guild members. But I say, if you've seen a ferret outpace a telegram boy, you'll believe anything. From a trapdoor in the corner, a stairway leads downward into a musty, honey-lit tunnel where several rodents stretch on little rugs and snack on almonds. They like yoga, the woman whispers, as though you might disrupt their chi. One particularly rotund mouse appears to be meditating. Another naps under a postage stamp like it's a weighted blanket. You crouch beside the stairwell and take in the quiet marvel of it all. The flickering candlelight, the tiny cots made from matchboxes, the cheese ledger with paw print signatures. There's a strange reverence to the whole place, an order, a purpose, a respect for furred civil servants who ask for nothing more than a walnut and a warm pocket. Suddenly, a bell rings overhead. Express incoming, the woman calls out. A whoosh, a squeak, and then pop. A ferret wearing goggles shoots out a return tube and lands neatly on a velvet pillow. It unstraps a package from its chest, flops sideways, and begins snoring immediately. Hard night, she says. You help her gently carry the snoozing hero to a thimble-sized hammock, tucking it in with a cloth that reads nap first, debrief later. As you return to the surface, the woman presses a small envelope into your hand. It's blank, sealed with wax, and weighs almost nothing. For you, she says, it'll open when you're most unsure. You glance down at it, and for a second it feels warm, like it's remembering something you haven't lived yet. Outside, the night is deeper but softer. The mist feels less like mystery now, more like a blanket. You hear the faint chime of another squirrel dashing past on a tiny saddlebag leash. It squeaks proudly. You wave, because at this point, why wouldn't you? The city rustles like parchment behind you as you continue on, one step closer to the heart of strangeness, one squirrel closer to enlightenment. You follow the fog into streets even the pigeons have forgotten. Everything here seems a little too quiet, like the bricks themselves are holding their breath. You pass rows of shuttered apothecaries and tea shops with cracked windows until the scent of iron and lavender stops you in your tracks. You're near a mews, a long row of old stables, but these don't hold horses. Instead, through the haze, you spot the unmistakable silhouette of a cat. Only this one wears a miniature leather harness and a medallion stamped with the words, Royal Alarm Society, Certified Wake-Up Agent. The cat blinks once at you, slow and unimpressed. Then it yowls at a nearby window until a sleepy-looking man appears, opens the pane, and drops a single coin into a hanging tin cup. With that transaction complete, the cat pads off down the cobblestones. You blink. Did that feline just get paid? Mainstream historical fact. In 19th century Britain, especially before alarm clocks became widely affordable, knocker-uppers were hired to wake people up by tapping on windows with sticks, throwing pebbles, or, in rare and experimental cases, training animals to do the job. Cats, being creatures of irritating precision, were sometimes employed to meow at designated times outside bedroom windows. And yes, they were compensated with food or small wages. You trail the cat to the far end of the mews, where a brass plaque reads Sir Reginald Fluffington's Bureau of Timekeeping Cats. Inside is a converted coach house with small velvet cushions, wall-mounted shelves at stagger heights, and an entire bulletin board labeled Night Shifts, Meow Mandates Only. A grizzled old woman wearing a shawl full of loose feathers sits in the corner. sipping tea and filling out time cards with paw prints. "Ah," she says without looking up. "You found our finest punctuality enforcers." On cue, another cat enters. This one a tubby gray tabby with a bell collar and what appears to be a pocket watch on a velvet ribbon. It jumps onto a stool beside her, places one paw firmly on a slip of paper labeled Baker, 4:45 a.m., and lets out a single righteous yowl. "That one's Hobson," she says proudly. "Woke up all at Dockside last month. Bit the mayor's boot for good measure." Hobson blinks at you. You're not entirely sure whether it's a threat or a high five. She gestures to the wall behind her where cat portraits hang in golden frames, each with a name, shift schedule, and brief performance review. Mittens, punctual, moody. Soothe, hates Mondays. Thistle, fire for excessive smugness. Quirky tidbit. There was a brief trend in East London during the 1870s of assigning feline wake-up agents specific social tones. Some were trained to be gentle and cooing for anxious customers, while others were encouraged to act more aggressively, scratching at windows, toppling flower pots, or even climbing onto rooftops to scream through chimneys. The most famous, a tabby named Elvira, was nicknamed the Yowling Widow for her operatic wail. A narrow spiral staircase leads to the sleeping quarters upstairs. Except the beds are square baskets, each labeled with brass plate and a list of window routes. One cat stretches in its basket, knocking over a note that reads, "Mrs. Penfield. Requires double meow, deaf in left ear." You pause, fascinated, as a younger cat practices pawing a brass bell gently. An older Tom corrects it, pushing the bell harder, then mimicking a high-pitched meow, before licking its ear like a bored mentor. "You know," the old woman says, "historians still argue whether these cats truly understood the task, or they were just in it for the fish and praise. But I say this, who else got hundreds of men to work on time during the railway boom?" She walks you past a chalkboard where scribbled numbers and sleep charts line the surface. A fish-shaped pendulum swings slowly beneath it. The whole room smells like catnip, coal, and punctual dreams. You reach a side door that opens into a tiny courtyard filled with training equipment. Rope ladders, miniature windowsills, even a collection of old boots for biting practice. A young kitten attempts to climb the boot, fails, and falls into a pile of hay with a tiny squeak. Hobson pads over, nuzzles the kitten, and meows once with the gravity of a disappointed manager. You can't help but laugh. Just then, a chime rings from above. It's 3 a.m., shift change. The cats stir like clockwork gears, stretching, leaping from shelves, padding toward their satchels and marked windows. The woman lifts a bell and rings it 3 times. Wake-up agents deploy. Like a feline militia, they vanish through windows and cat-sized doors, dispersing into the sleeping city. You watch as Hobson disappears into the fog with a look that says, "No one will oversleep on my watch." The woman hands you a crumpled pamphlet titled, "So You've Hired a Wake-Up Cat. You want to keep that," she says. They can be enthusiastic. You pocket the paper, step out into the chilly air, and find the city just a little livelier than before. A baker lights a lantern. A milk cart clatters somewhere in the distance. The world yawns and stretches. And from a nearby rooftop, a sharp, melodious meow rings out like a battle cry. You smile, because somewhere out there, Hobson's doing his job, You follow the faint echo of Hobson's wake-up meow down an alley that narrows like a throat, where the gaslight flickers just enough to keep the shadows entertained. It's quieter here, not the hush of peace, but the kind that happens just before something peculiar steps out from behind a curtain. And something does. A pigeon, but not just any pigeon. This one has a tiny brass tube strapped to its leg, and what appears to be a monocle glued to its face. It lands with the pomp of a royal messenger and begins pecking rhythmically at a cellar door. You wait. The door opens. A boy of about 12 appears, wearing a soot-smeared smock, fingerless gloves, and a badge that reads, Society of Pigeon Informants, Urban Chapter. He nods at you with a solemnity usually reserved for war veterans and disgruntled librarians. You're not supposed to see this, he says, but you already have, so now you're part of it. You consider protesting. You don't. The boy whistles a sharp three-note pattern, and suddenly, the sky seems to hiccup with motion. Pigeons emerge from the rooftops, all carrying brass tubes, scraps of parchment, or what might be tiny coated cheddars. One even has a tiny cloak. Meet the informants, the boy says proudly. Our job? Cheese smuggling surveillance, bakery gossip collection, and the occasional missing sock investigation. Mainstream historical fact. Homing pigeons were widely used throughout the 19th century for communication, especially during wars. But in some European cities, underground pigeon courier services formed among tradespeople who used them to pass along sensitive information, such as market shortages, illegal ingredient swaps, or secret sleep bomb recipes sold behind closed shop shutters. The boy leads you down into the cellar, where the walls are lined with wooden perches, tiny hammocks, and something that looks suspiciously like a pigeon-sized chaise lounge. One bird reclines on it with a tiny sleep mask over its eyes. They work hard, the boy says. Gotta keep morale up. There's a long table covered in scrolls, birdseed, and maps with pins. At the center is a parchment labeled, Ongoing Surveillance, Suspicious Night Cheese Movements, Zone 3. Someone has underlined Zone 3 in red ink shaped like a dramatic lightning bolt. You'd be amazed how many people try to sneak triple cream into areas clearly designated for mild cheddar. The boy mutters, absolute madness. A pigeon with unusually fluffy feathers flaps onto the desk and pecks at a bell. The boy unfurls the parchment it carries. Another bakery hoarding sleep muffins. He says, we'll have to send in Clive. Clive is a scraggly pigeon with an eye patch and an attitude. Clive nods. You're not sure how, but he does. Quirky tidbit. There was a brief pigeon espionage craze in Victorian London. Some claim a group of teenage boys trained pigeons to recognize the scent of specific cheeses and report back with tailored routes for midnight raids. This culminated in the infamous Brie bust of 1884, in which 4 boys and 12 pigeons were caught smuggling fondue supplies into a sleep therapy salon. Historians still argue whether these operations were truly effective. The boy says, scratching his chin, or whether it was just an elaborate way for bored kids to skip school and hang out with birds. But either way, the pigeon seemed into it. He gestures to a board labeled Employee of the Month with a hand-drawn portrait of a particularly round bird named Gregory. Gregory struts past, dragging a piece of ribbon like it owes him money. The boy pauses beside a display case housing tiny medals, bird-sized satchels, and a single preserved biscuit. That's from Eliza, he says reverently. First pigeon to deliver 5 messages without pecking a single eyebrow. Your face says it all. Yes, Eyebrows. Don't ask. Suddenly, a bell rings, high and sharp. All hands, the boy calls. Pigeons flap into organized chaos, swooping to their satchels, lining up in formation and chirping like caffeinated telegraph wires. A long wooden lever is pulled, and a skylight opens overhead, revealing the pre-dawn light brushing the rooftops. The pigeons rise like a living quilt and scatter across the city. You watch them go, feathers catching gold as they disappear over chimney stacks and fog-veiled streets. The boy salutes. Then he reaches into a pouch and pulls out a note, rolled and tied with a scrap of ribbon. "Here," he says, "for you." You open it. The handwriting is spidery, but firm. Trust the cat. Follow the cheese. Beware the goat. Gee. You look up to ask, but the boy is already whistling again, directing a sleepy dove toward the grain pile. He doesn't explain. He doesn't have to. You fold the note and pocket it. Outside, the first real beams of morning light break across the rooftops, catching just enough of a brass tube glint to make you smile. The pigeons are watching. You step back out into the waking city with feathers in your hair, and a sense that you might now be considered a minor asset in a cheese-based intelligence network. A breeze carries the scent of something floral and faintly buttery, like someone is baking scones using dreams instead of flour. You follow your nose. It leads you past a closed flower stall, a lamplighter humming softly to himself as he extinguishes the final flickers of gaslight, and a very bored-looking ferret perched on a windowsill, wearing a bow tie and glaring at the sunrise like it owes him money. Then, just as you pass an alley framed with chipped plaster and ivy, a small door creaks open on your left. A girl peeks out. She's perhaps 10, with unruly curls, spectacles far too big for her face, and a satchel that looks like it's been through a minor maritime disaster. "You're here for the bees, aren't you?" she asks. You say nothing, because how could you be? She doesn't wait, with a huff and a head tilt that suggests she's already 3 promotions past you in this mystery chain of command. She motions for you to follow. You step into a courtyard that feels several degrees warmer than the street. Sunlight filters through flowering trellises, and the air is sweet with lavender, sage, and the unmistakable whiff of dairy. Mainstream historical fact. In 19th century London, urban beekeeping was a growing trend, particularly among apothecaries and botanists. Rooftop hives became small-scale sources of honey, wax, and natural remedies. Some healers even infused honey with herbs and soft cheese as a nighttime tonic, believed to soothe anxiety and encourage sleep. The girl points to a row of hives, each painted a different pastel color and topped with strange little sculptures. One has a carved wheel of cheese. Another, a mouse in a bonnet. The third simply says, "Do not knock unless you are cheese." She adjusts her spectacles. "These are sleep bees," she explains. You blink. They pollinate only at night, prefer herbs associated with rest, like chamomile, valerian, and lemon balm, and produce dream honey. It's not sweet. It's soft, like warm fog in a jar. She gestures to a large marmalade-colored tabby, lounging on a stone bench, paws tucked under his body like he's meditating. That's Lord Custard. He oversees hive diplomacy. Don't touch him unless he initiates. Lord Custard opens one eye. You do not touch him. The girl leads you to a low bench beside a table covered in small glass jars. Inside each is a swirl of golden liquid and a square of what appears to be creamy white cheese, suspended like fruit in jelly. This, she says, holding up a jar reverently, is our most potent combination. Sleepy Stilton and lavender honey. 2 spoonfuls and you'll nap like a saint. Quirky tidbit. In Victorian circles, it wasn't uncommon to mix cheese into sweet preserves, particularly for medicinal use. Some even believed that a proper blend could trap nightmares like flies in amber, preserving only the good dreams for digestion. She opens another jar and dips in a sliver of oat biscuit. You follow suit. The moment it hits your tongue, the world slows, colors deepen. The buzzing of the bees becomes melodic, as if the whole courtyard is humming in harmony with your nervous system. Historians still argue whether these herbal cheese infusions were genuinely effective, she says, swirling her jar, or just another excuse to consume dairy before bed. But if you ask the bees, she pauses, they keep coming back. A small bell rings behind you. A tiny mouse, where what looks like a walnut shell is a backpack, scurries up a winding ramp and drops a petal into one of the jars. The girl nods appreciatively. Freelancer, she whispers, very punctual. You sip a little more dream honey. The air grows thicker, softer. Everything feels steeped in gold. Lord Custer yawns with the grace of an opera diva. You notice a small chart pinned to hive wall. Pollen-sourced, dream-type cheese pairing. Chamomile cloud-walking goat brie. Valerian gentle storm sounds, blue Stilton. Wild thyme fly in slow motion, roasted Wensleydale. Your eyes drift toward a covered tray nearby, labeled, for delivery to the Knapp Orchard. Handle with awe. Inside are 12 tiny parcels wrapped in beeswax cloth, each with a tag. One reads, for the bareness of bothered eyelids. Another says, emergency reserve for Tuesday feelings. You're simply Reed's traveler. Use before doubt sets in. The girl hands you your parcel and says, without inflection, use wisely. Lord Custard blinks once. That feels like permission to leave. You rise, tuck the beeswax-wrapped treasure into your satchel, and follow a winding vine-covered gate that swings open just in time to let you pass. Outside, the city seems to exhale. The streets glisten with dew. The sky is doing its best impression of a shy peach. You walk onward, the dream honey still blooming on your tongue, and wonder what else London's forgotten creatures have to offer. A soft clink in your pocket reminds you the beeswax-wrapped parcel, now gently warming against your side like a secret with its own pulse. You resist the urge to unwrap it too soon. It feels like one of those gifts that works best if opened exactly when needed and not a moment earlier. Your shoes squelch slightly on the cobbles, still damp with dew, and the alley you enter smells faintly of soot flour and lemon oil. It's the kind of street that looks unimportant until you realize every house has 3 chimneys and at least 1 pigeon wearing something resembling a monocle. Then you see it, a bakery wedged between a locksmith and something unlabeled but suspiciously mossy. The sign above the lintel reads, Snuffles and Sons, ye old crust enthusiasts. You push the door open. A bell jingles, but not overhead. No, this bell is on the neck of a scrappy-looking terrier wearing a waistcoat and a single sock on his front paw. The terrier stares at you. You stare back. Then, without breaking eye contact, he trots behind the counter and taps a bell on the wall with his nose. From the flowery back room, a man emerges. Except, nope, not a man. A very large tabby cat in a gingham apron, walking upright and looking frankly exhausted. Snuffles Jr. The cat says in a gravelly voice that might have once belonged to a chimney sweep. Customer: you're not sure if you're dreaming or inside a particularly weird cheese hallucination, but either way, it smells amazing, and there's a strong possibility that a pastry might solve all your emotional baggage. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian London, certain bakeries employed stray animals, particularly cats and small terriers, not just as rodent control, but also as mascots, delivery companions, or even greeters. Some were issued small uniforms, and their likenesses featured on advertisements to boost business. Snuffles the terrier returns, balancing a tray of steaming rolls on his back, and gestures with his snout for you to take one. The scent is everything. Melted Wensleydale, lemon zest, a whisper of rosemary, and something that might be toasted pine nuts or crushed nostalgia. You bite, your teeth sink through crust and crumble and cheese, and for a moment, you forget how to spell your own name. It's that good. Snuffles Jr. eyes you, arms folded. We add dream honey to the glaze, he explains, wiping his paws on a flour sack. Just a hint, too much, and the pigeons start telling secrets again. You nod solemnly, crumbs coating your lip. A pigeon taps on the window. Snuffles waves him off. The cat motions for you to follow him behind the counter. You duck under a low wooden beam and emerge into a narrow room lined with shelves. On each rests a loaf or pastry, tagged not with names but with moods. Minor existential panic with marmalade, regret reduction croissant. That time you left the party early and it was fine anyway roll, just some cheese and peace. Quirky tidbit. There's a documented case in 1874 of a South London bakery that sold a limited run scone called Lullaby Loaf, made from oat flour, sage, grated cheddar, and poppy seed oil. Customers reported vivid dreams, and the loaf became briefly infamous for causing a city official to sleep through a council vote and accidentally approve a petting zoo in a tax office. Snuffles Jr. reaches into a small drawer and pulls out a scroll. This one's for you, he says, handing it over, passed down by crust whisperers. You unroll the scroll. The paper smells like cardamom and soot. At the top, in ornate script, it reads, The Ritual of Restorative Biscuitry. Step 1. Eat something warm made with care. Step 2. Allow yourself to enjoy it. Step 3. Repeat step 2. Step 4. Sit still. Let crumbs fall where they may. Step 5. Trust that the dreams will arrive full-bellied. A simple recipe, sure, but it lands somewhere between gospel and therapy. Historians still argue whether bakeries like this ever truly existed. The cat says, brushing flour off his whiskers, or they're just part of that mythos people tell themselves to feel like the city is kinder than it is. Snuffles barks softly. The cat shrugs. Doesn't matter either way, really. If the cheese is warm and the crust doesn't cut your gums, what more truth do you need? You sit for a while in the back room. There's a small bench by the hearth, a cup of something steamy, probably oat milk and sweet whey, is placed into your hands by no one you can identify. You sip. It tastes like the absence of hurry. Above the fireplace hangs a framed sketch. A lineup of animals in aprons, dogs, cats, one hedgehog, each holding a baking tool. Someone's drawn halos over their heads in gold ink. You breathe deep. The clock on the mantle ticks gently, not like it's keeping time, but like it's rocking it to sleep. The cat curls up on a flour sack, tail flicking. Snuffles leans his chin on your knee. You let yourself sink just a little deeper into the chair, into the quiet, into that pocket of London where forgotten pets run bakeries and cheese dreams are folded into crusts. The bell above the door jingles again. A young woman walks in, wrapped in a shawl stitched with constellations, and holds out a basket. Without a word, Snuffles hops up, loads her basket with parcels wrapped in brown paper and twine, and tucks in a small card. She nods, curtsies to the cat, and leaves. The cat looks at you. She delivers to the Knapp orchard. They need fresh comfort every morning. You finish the last of your roll. Time to go. You step out of the bakery slower than you entered. Every bone in your body softened by warmth, cheese, and possibly a whisper of emotional closure you didn't realize you needed. The air outside is cooler now, the kind of cool that makes you think of well-washed sheets and windows just slightly cracked open at bedtime. You wrap your arms around yourself as you walk, cradling the last of your pastry like a relic from a kinder timeline. A long cobbled path curves ahead, flanked on both sides by lampposts that flicker not with flames, but with bioluminescent moths in tiny wire cages. Their gentle light casts an iridescent shimmer across the street, making the puddles look like melted moonstones. You follow the curve until the buildings widen apart, revealing a wide courtyard paved with round stones and patterned like a wheel of cheese. No, really. The whole square is shaped like a giant wedge, complete with circular pavers at the center and slice-like spokes leading outward. At the far end stands a sign, not a storefront this time, but a wooden sandwich board propped against a barrel. It reads, "The Brotherhood of Night Nuzzlers welcomes you," small print below. Whiskers optional but encouraged. You blink. A little harder this time. To your left, a woman in a quilted dressing gown stands polishing an enormous brass spoon that's taller than she is. She nods in greeting, then flips the sign around. Now it says, "Rat Tailors, Bat Masseurs, and the occasional goat barber." You're about to ask if this is another dream when the bell rings, not overhead, not nearby, but from below. A small trapdoor in the center of the courtyard creaks open, and up emerges a hedgehog wearing bifocals and dragging behind him a velvet banner. Sleeper aid. He squeaks, quite officially. Form a line if your thoughts have exceeded acceptable RPM. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian London had actual animal employment societies that gave semi-official titles to pets who lived at hospitals, inns, or theaters. Cats were often registered as rodent managers, while dogs were trained to serve as therapy companions, even being issued name tags or duty rosettes. You shuffle into a line. A badger in a blue velvet cape checks your posture. An elderly crow drops a sash over your shoulder. It reads, simply, "Fatigue honored." A sleepy accordion begins to play, possibly by itself. Quirky tidbit. In 1881, a satirical pamphlet titled The Drowsy Companion's Almanac detailed fictitious sleep societies across England, like the Brotherhood of the 4 p.m. Nap and the Guild of Resting Beavers. Though it was intended as parody, many readers believed it, and some even formed their own clubs in its honor. The parade begins. You march slowly, not from pride, but from shared exhaustion, with a dozen or so others, all draped in odd fabrics and wearing absurd but endearing titles. A weasel in a monocle clutches a teacup labeled Mental Fog. A ferret in argyle socks plays a tambourine softly, as if apologizing with each shake. You round the square once. Twice. The rhythm lulls you into a warm sort of daze, like that moment between dozing off and dreaming, where time gets all gummy around the edges. Historians still argue whether these animal-led ceremonies were ever real. Someone whispers beside you, possibly the goat barber himself, judging by the clippers on his belt. Or if we all just remember them the way we needed to. The third round ends with everyone lying down. Yes, in the courtyard, on enormous velvet floor cushions, each one slightly warm as if recently hugged by a sunbeam. You find a cushion with a stitched-on patch that says, "Pending nap." It fits. The accordion sighs one last time. A tiny bell rings. Then, stillness. You let your arms fall heavy, eyes half-lidded, your head barely tilted toward the stars above. They don't twinkle so much as glow, as if maybe they're conserving energy too. Someone drapes a blanket over you. It smells like cardamom and goat milk, and the fabric used to line favorite childhood jackets. And right before you slip under completely, you hear the hedgehog again, reading from what sounds like a scroll of nightly intentions. May your breath be slow, your spine unwound. May your troubles drop off and not be found. May dreams arrive on velvet paws and nudge you gently towards sleep's laws. It rhymes. You forgive it, because the courtyard feels like the last room in your heart unlocking just a little. You wake up, or you think you do, to the softest sensation, a tongue brushing your cheek. Before your defense mechanisms can scream no thank you, you realize it's just a very old pug standing on your chest. He's wearing a bonnet. It's crocheted. There's a cheese medallion sewn to front. He snorts with satisfaction and trots off, leaving the faintest scent of chamomile and dog biscuits in his wake. You sit up slowly. The velvet cushion beneath you is molded perfectly to your shape, and the morning light is pink and sleepy as it filters to the edges of a curtain that wasn't there yesterday. Where exactly are you? Turns out you're inside a mobile animal shelter. And not just any animal shelter, a retirement home for working pets of Victorian London. To your right, a corgi with a monocle is snoozing under a knitted afghan. A small plaque above his bed reads, Sir Yipsalot, former alarm system at Baker Street, 1887 to 1903. To your left, a pair of sleek ferrets are gently massaging the paws of an elderly marmalade cat, who you overhear was once the lead mouser at the Royal Opera House. You blink hard, but nope, it's all still here. A nurse rat in a pressed pinafore scurries past, balancing a tray of teacups and what appear to be cubes of cheese dusted with lavender. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian Londoners held working animals in high regard, especially those in urban professions. Cats employed in post offices were paid in meat and milk stipends, while dogs serving in courthouses or fire brigades often received ceremonial medals, small pensions, or cozy retirement arrangements when they aged out of duty. A small sign on the wall reads, Sanctuary of Sleepers, where every nap is earned. Below it, a wall of framed portraits. Some are painted, others are crude charcoal sketches, but all depict animals in uniform. Pigeons with post bags, a bulldog with an inspector's badge, even a parrot in a tam o'shanter hat holding a miniature ledger. You walk down a narrow hallway where a long tapestry hangs from ceiling to floor. Woven into the fabric are dozens of tiny vignettes, each one a scene of an animal on the job. A mouse lighting a gas lamp, a matchstick, a spaniel licking envelopes closed at a postal desk, a cat wearing spectacles, perched atop a library stack with a tiny quill. Quirky tidbit. A fringe society in 1870s London known as the Order Nocturnal Service held monthly story nights, during which elderly pets recited tales through pantomime, interpreted by their owners. Attendees believed this helped honor animal memory and channel their wisdom for future generations. The society dissolved after a scandal involving a badge of memoir that turned out to be plagiarized from a hedgehog. You pass a reading nook, where a marmot wearing a bow tie is snoring gently atop a pile of illustrated books. A cover catches your eye, The Cheese Merchant Spaniel, True Tales of Dairy Dog Duty. You chuckle and reach for it, but before your fingers graze the spine, a warm paw lands on your wrist. You look up to see a tabby with white paws and watery eyes. She wears a shawl made of patchwork handkerchiefs and nods slowly as if to say, "That one's not finished with story yet." You back away respectfully. She curls up and resumes her nap with the authority of a queen. Just then, a low chime rings through the corridor, soft as a lullaby from the bones of a bell. A tiny gate opens at the far end of the hall, leading out into a courtyard bathed in golden sun. A tortoise in a velvet cap begins leading a yoga class. Sort of. It's mostly gentle head turns and shell polishing. A chorus of gentle bleats comes from the garden. An entire row of retired cheese delivery goats are lounging beneath a pergola draped in flowering vines. Each goat has a tiny bell, but instead of ringing, they emit calming tones like wind chimes underwater. Historians still argue whether this sanctuary ever existed. A voice whispers behind you, or it was a shared hallucination sparked by mild lactose hallucinosis. You turn to find a tall figure in a flowing robe stitched with tiny paw prints. Their faces painted in soft stripes, part animal, part human, part maybe the dream itself. They speak with the kind of voice that feels like honey being poured over a sleepy brain. But real or not, they add, every city should have won. They hand you a small biscuit wrapped in cheesecloth and gesture toward a wide lounge filled with tufted pillows, dream journals, and soft fiddling music that seems to come from the air itself. You bite into the biscuit. It crumbles like chalk, tastes like fondue at a baby with flour, and something inside your chest lets go. Not a sigh exactly, more like a release. You sit among the animals, some snoring, some reading, one notably knitting with yarn made from its own shed fur, and begin to sketch in one of the blank journals. Your hand moves on its own. You don't try to control it, because something about being here reminds you that not all jobs are meant to be remembered by time or plaque or historical record. Some are simply meant to be thanked and retired well. You close the journal gently and pet the cat that is suddenly curled beside your leg. You don't ask permission. She doesn't ask for it. It's just understood. The tabby's rhythmic purring is a lullaby in itself, blending with the creak of wicker, the distant bleating of retired goats, and the occasional contented snore of a marmot deep in post-lunch slumber. You stretch, blink, and realize you've dozed off right there on the pillow-strewn floor, a feathered bookmark still tucked in your lap like a sleepy trophy. But now the air has changed. It feels charged, warmer, with a faint aroma of cinnamon, old parchment, and something unmistakably dairy, like a cheese rind left near a fireplace on purpose. Someone taps you gently with a cane. It's a skunk, wearing pince-nez spectacles and a brown cloak stitched with silver thread. He points a striped paw toward a spiral staircase you swear wasn't there before. The archive is expecting you, he says with gravity, as if this moment had been scheduled since you were born. So naturally you follow. The stairs spiral downward, not in a dizzying way, but in the gentle, tilted manner of an idea forming in a dream. Each step is a soft clink on stone, and every wall is lined with glowing cheese wheels embedded like fossils in sandstone. Finally, you reach the bottom, a domed chamber with glowing glyphs and floating motes of cheese dust. It's dead silent. And then a wheeze, a thump, a hum. Enter the archivist, a very large goose in a velvet turban, seated behind an oaken desk covered in scrolls, ledgers, and what appears to be an open block of Wensleydale scribbled with tiny notes. He raises his head slowly. "Name!" He honks. You hesitate. He waves a wing dismissively. "Never mind. I know your type. You're a walker, a listener, a rememberer of job forgotten." He slaps a scroll down with flair. "We've got records to review." Mainstream historical fact. In the late 1800s, Londoners began recording the labor contributions of animals, not just for work statistics, but for moral accounting. Ledgers from the Metropolitan Livestock Office document animals' service years, temperament notes, and in some cases, retirement rewards like cushioned stables, collars with medals, or dedicated grave markers. The goose flaps to a nearby cabinet, opens it with his beak, and reveals shelves upon shelves of sealed cheese rounds, each labeled in calligraphy, with names like Basil the Beefeater Terrier or Lady Winchetter the Soot Goose. "These are the taste memories," he intones. Each one contains a pet's entire working life, compressed, preserved, occasionally edible. He selects one at random and cracks it open. A puff of scent escapes, oak wood, soot, and the unmistakable tang of vinegar. You're no longer in the archive. You're on a cobbled London street in thick morning fog, watching a small goat drag a wheeled cheese cart up a hill so steep it might be emotional metaphor. The goat's name is Hazel. She delivers healing cheese lozenges to a row of invalids and war veterans who reward her with head pats and kind whispers. She never misses a step. Back in the archive, the goose seals a rhyme with a nod. That one always gets me. You watch as he gently replaces the wheel, careful not to disturb the stacked rounds labeled Snout and Company, Chimney Canaries or Lettuce the Hedgehog, Wallpaper Inspector, 1874. Historians still argue whether these records were ceremonial or sincere, the goose mutters. But those who remember don't forget how it felt to be protected by paws and feathers and scales. He hands you a wedge wrapped in silk, your memory to carry, for what's ahead. You thank him, not quite sure what to do with a slice of cinnamon, but you tuck it in your pocket anyway. As you turn to leave, the staircase fades behind you. In its place, a tunnel paved with mosaic tiles depicting animal legends, mice saving ships, cats calming hysterics, and a lizard organizing laundry by color. You follow the path into a cool, blue-lit hallway. It smells of damp stone, peppermints, and fresh hay. At the far end, a set of tall barn doors creak open slowly. Inside, the Hall of Honors. A round room under a stained glass dome where shafts of colored light spill across rows of velvet cushions. On each one, a taxidermy likeness, a bronze paw print, or a framed portrait. You walk slowly, reading nameplates. Captain Fluff, Rail Tunnel Canary. Marjorie, Public Bath Otter and Silk Collector. Gubbins, Emergency Sock Retriever. The names blur as you feel yourself sinking into something old and soft and respectful. A reverence that settles between your ribs. Quirky tidbit. A secret museum known as the Parlor of Paws existed briefly in 1891 behind a cheese shop in Clerkenwell. Only open to members of a pet welfare society, it honored unsung animals with tiny shrines, poetic dedications, and reportedly a fully functional guinea pig pipe organ. A gentle bell rings somewhere above you, not urgent, just suggestive. You follow the sound into a side room filled with plush chairs, warm blankets, and a tray of tiny cheese cubes on sticks, each one labeled with a dream theme: memory recall, emotional clarity, restorative fog. You pick restorative fog because your chest feels warm but your head feels heavy. The cheese tastes like honeysuckle and wool, and a hug you didn't know you needed. You curl into the chair, draping a blanket across your lap, and whisper thank you, though you're not sure to whom. You close your eyes, and then something curious happens. The animals begin to glow, not brightly, not alarmingly, just a soft shimmer, like candlelight seen through soup. Their shapes shift ever so slightly. A cat becomes suggestion. A pigeon turns into a puff of warmth. And you become something too. Lighter, less tired, more remembered. You blink slowly, the golden shimmer still hovering on the edges of your vision. It fades, but not completely, leaving behind a kind of hum in your bones, as if every vertebra just received a thank you letter. The chair beneath you is now rocking gently on its own, swaying like a gondola on a foggy Venetian canal made entirely of warm milk and bedtime secrets. Then, creak, a door opens again, this time behind a tapestry embroidered with a ferret riding a unicycle. You step through and find yourself in an atrium with stained glass windows shaped like dog tags, each catching moonlight and casting it in halos across the marble floor. In the center, a spiral staircase, again, but this one descends through clouds. You look up. A dormouse in velvet suspenders leans against the railing, sipping what appears to be mulled cider from a thimble. He gestures lazily toward the stairs. "Caretaker's waiting," he squeaks. "Better bring the soft parts of your mind." You descend. The walls shift as you move. First stone, then ivy, then shelves made of old biscuit tins and broom handles. The deeper you go, the warmer the air becomes, like you're climbing down into the pocket of a nap. At the bottom, a round door carved with paw prints and musical notes. It opens without touch. Inside, the room is dim and humming softly. A cat, ancient, enormous, and wearing bifocals, sits by a roaring hearth. Her fur is more whisker than structure, and her voice sounds like velvet that's seen things. "You're just in time," she purrs, "for the reading." You're not entirely sure what that means, but there's a cushion by the fire with your name stitched on it, literally. Your full name, spelled right, and with decorative cheese motifs. You settle in, legs folding like old letters. She begins. "Tonight, we remember Bixby," she intones, "the pug who served as a London fog tester." You blink. "Each morning," she continues, "he'd wander the neighborhoods of Bermondsey wearing a velvet snood and brass bell, noting the thickness, taste, and emotional quality of the mist." Mainstream historical fact. During periods of heavy smog in 19th century London, people relied on weather watchers, sometimes including pets with sensitive senses, to report how thick or acidic the fog was. Some local shopkeepers paid boys or trained animals to make the rounds, alerting neighborhoods when the yellow soup air became hazardous. Bixby, she explains, was known to sneeze twice for safe 3 times for wear a scarf, and sit down completely for stay inside or perish. You snort laugh, and she raises a single eyebrow, satisfied. Then she taps a stack of scrolls by her side. Would you like to hear about the carriage parrots? Well, now you have to. Turns out for a brief, ridiculous decade in the 1850s, a trend swept through London's wealthier quarters. Parrots trained to shout traffic instructions from the tops of carriages. They wore tiny frock coats and were paid in sugar cubes and fan applause. Quirky tidbit. In 1856, a parrot named Lord Peppy was knighted in a mock ceremony for preventing a collision between 2 bickering dukes' carriages by squawking, "Yield, you preposterous scone," at precisely the right moment. The event was later painted on porcelain. The cat chuckles quietly to herself as she rolls another scroll. Historians still argue whether the carriage parrot trend improved road safety or simply gave the rich something to squawk about. She says dryly, either way, London was never quieter. You lean into the pillow. The fire cracks at a polite yawn. Outside, wind sighs past windows shaped like ears. And what of Wilhelmina the mole, she muses, once hired by a bakery to dig emergency escape tunnels for gingerbread deliveries delayed by street parades. You blink. You're not dreaming. This was real enough to be written down, apparently. Wilhelmina even had a silk-lined helmet and was paid in strawberry custard. The stories flow like tea with too much honey. The canary courtroom translator who chirped confessions during trials. The retired hedgehog train conductor who always knew when passengers fell asleep and snuck knitted blankets over their knees. The barn owl who rang bells at dusk to warn children to finish their turnip homework. One after another, woven not just with whimsy, but something quieter, something reverent, as if every creature, however small or ridiculous, helped patch the holes in a tired city soul. Eventually, the cat pauses. You've slouched so far down your cushion, you're practically a folded coat. She reaches over with one elegant paw and places a warm saucer of something creamy and nutmeg-scented beside you. You sip. It tastes like lullabies, melted toast, and the feeling of having done enough for one day. The fire dims. The cat begins humming. Not a song, exactly. More like a memory being remembered by someone else. And then she says, "One more tale before you fade?" You nod. "It's about an old badger," she says, "who ran a lost and found for forgotten animal workers. He spent every Sunday polishing tiny boots, mending torn cloaks, and writing thank you notes on behalf of the city. He never signed them, just left a paw print and a wedge of cheese. He believed," the cat continues, "that no kindness should be anonymous, but no ego should own it either." She curls her tail around her paws. That badger's gone now, but the notes still arrive. You think, somewhere deep in your chest, that one of them might be meant for you. The fire flickers. A soft bell rings in the distance again. The cat nods, satisfied. "Time to go," she whispers. "But don't worry," she adds, standing slowly, bones creaking like old floorboards. "You'll find your way back. You're part of the archive now." You smile. It's too much effort to speak. But you know, you always knew, the cheese remembers. The bell's echo lingers like breath on a window pane, and the fire gives one last sigh, as if exhaling you gently into the next part of your journey. You stand, or dream you stand, and find yourself back in the stairwell. But this time, it's not a descent or a climb. It's just a hallway. A curving corridor with glowing murals on the walls. Paintings that shift subtly as you pass, like living snapshots caught mid-sentence. One shows a terrier mid-bark on top of a soapbox, surrounded by a crowd of rats in waistcoats. The next, a duck in a powdered wig balancing scales of justice. You're not surprised anymore. You just keep walking. The carpet underfoot feels like moss dipped in tea. The air smells faintly of butterscotch and something vaguely medicinal, like the memory of a grandmother's purse. At the end of the corridor is a doorway shaped like a croissant. You push it open with both hands and step inside a parlor that's equal parts antique shop, animal shelter, and cheese tasting room. A single man stands behind a counter carved from old piano keys. He's wearing a bow tie and a name tag that reads, Algernon, Bureaucrat of Beasts. He adjusts his spectacles, barely glances up. Name. You blink. Say it. He nods and flips through a ledger thicker than your tax anxiety. Ah, yes. Schedule for reminiscence review and feather buffing. Before you can object, a goose in suspenders waddles out holding a clipboard and a tiny mug of cocoa. Follow me, please. It honks politely. You do. The next room is softly lit, with velvet chairs in a circle. In each sits a creature who turns slowly as you enter, offering faint smiles, nods, or in the case of a particularly smug-looking rabbit, a tiny top hat tip. One of them, a weasel with spectacles, clears his throat and gestures toward the final empty chair. We've just begun sharing our last duties, he says. You're not late, merely stylishly delayed. You sit, and the weasel continues. I was employed by a hat maker, he begins, to test the aerodynamic resistance of bonnets in wind tunnels. You blink. He nods, proud. They said I had the right head shape. Balanced, curious, elegant, but humble. Next up, a hedgehog adjusts a tartan scarf and chimes in. I worked nights as a bed warmer in a children's hospital, just curled up under the covers before they were wheeled in. No one knew, just thought the beds were extra cozy. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian children's hospitals often used unconventional comfort methods, including warm bricks, sandbags, and occasionally small, calm animals placed under bedding to retain heat and ease anxiety. The concept of animal warmth was considered soothing, especially before central heating. Everyone claps gently, paws, claws, hooves, and all. Then a parrot, who's been sharpening a tiny monocle with a toothpick, speaks. I translated bedtime stories into nonsense rhymes for orphanages. The goal wasn't comprehension. It was rhythm. It helped them fall asleep. The room nods. There's a brief silence as everyone sips from their mugs. Whatever they contain smells like nutmeg and the inside of a well-loved quilt. Quirky tidbit. In some late 19th to 18th century institutions, parrots and songbirds were kept to provide background soundscapes. Researchers believe the irregular yet rhythmic patterns helped regulate children's breathing and heart rates, especially in sleep wards. Some birds were even trained to mimic lullaby cadences. You glance around. No one here is famous. No one here is rich. But they've all held roles with weight, with weirdness, with care. The rabbit clears his throat and says softly, historians still argue whether any of our jobs truly mattered, whether they were functional, symbolic, or just odd Victorian indulgences. He shrugs. But those kids smiled when they touched warm beds. Those hats didn't fly off on bridges. And nobody had to fall asleep in silence. The group murmurs agreement. You don't speak, but you nod. You get it now. A sleepy old sheepdog lumbers into the room and whispers something in the goose's ear. Your goose guide turns to you. Time for archiving. You're led to yet another room. This one long and filled with drawers. Tiny brass handles stretch from floor to ceiling. At the far end stands a marmot in velvet robes and a monocle made of a teacup handle. He points at an open drawer. Inside, a single photograph, sepia-toned, slightly curled at the edges, of a tired little mouse wearing an apron and pushing a broom twice the size. The caption, Herald, train station platform sweeper, 1871 to 1875. You add yours. Not a photo, not quite a memory, more like an impression, a soft, glimmering vignette of your journey here. The cheese, the cat, the stories, the laugh you didn't expect. You watch it fade gently into the drawer, like steam into a kettle. The marmot bows. Your goose guide leads you toward an exit archway where a gentle breeze wafts in, carrying scent of chamomile and toasted crumpet. There's a sign overhead that reads, "Some stories are better whispered." You pass under it. The world outside looks like twilight soaked in honey. A narrow path winds downward, lit by lanterns hanging from shepherd's crooks. Each glows faintly, some with actual fireflies, some with bottled starlight, and one that appears to run on the memory of hot soup. You take the first step. The path is soft. It welcomes you. Your goose says nothing, just gives a gentle honk of approval, then waddles back inside. And now you're alone, but not alone. You're full, with warmth, with story, with sleep. In the distance, something purrs, something laughs, something probably naps mid-sentence. You continue down the path, heart slow, eyes heavy, and every step feels like slipping deeper into a feathered dream. The cheese, after all, is still working. You follow the winding lantern-lit path, each step softened by moss and memory. The hush of the air is total now. Not silent, exactly, but gentle, like a quilt pulled up over a restless world. Your thoughts feel slower, softer, stretched out like a cat in a warm window. Ahead, you see a signpost crooked with age, hand-carved in slanty letters, library of lopsided legends, Knapp Orchard, Bureau of Sleepovers long forgotten. Because of course that's a thing. You turn left. The Knapp Orchard welcomes you with a scent of overripe apples and old books. The trees here are squat and wide, with hammocks strung between every pair. You pass by several slumbering figures, a badger snoring into a paperback, a goose mumbling about unpaid bills, a child clutching a plush wedge of cheese. You climb into an empty hammock. It creaks like a friendly ghost and cradles you without complaint. From this angle, the sky looks more watercolor than cosmos, and the stars appear unsure whether to twinkle or nap. There's a small plaque on the tree above you. This hammock donated in 1873 by Mabel the Marmot for nappers of noble spirit and decent hygiene. A breeze tugs gently at your blanket, which you didn't remember pulling over yourself. Somewhere nearby, a squirrel plucks a mandolin. Every note sounds like a young wearing a tuxedo. Mainstream historical fact. During the late 1800s, London's first rest gardens began to appear. Quiet spaces set aside specifically for napping or reflective silence, often funded by eccentric philanthropists who believed proper rest could prevent societal collapse. Some even provided light snacks, woolen wraps, or lullaby recitations read hourly by retired school teachers. You shift slightly in the hammock, feeling it rock you like a lullaby written in hammock language. A possum with a clipboard strolls by, glances at you, makes a check mark, and moves on without a word. Your name was probably on the list. From a nearby hammock, a whisper drifts over. You ever hear about the pigeon who saw the bakery fire? You blink, shake your head. The voice continues. Name was Hollandaise. Worked part-time delivering love notes, part-time smelling smoke. Raised alarm in time to save 6 cinnamon buns, and a retired opera singer. A second voice cuts in, gravelly and slow. Historians still argue whether Hollandaise actually warned them or if he just got lucky chasing a buttered crumb. But the buns were saved, and the singer lived to hit one more high note. There's laughter, soft rustling, like wind in bedtime curtains. The mandolin plinks out the tune to Rockabye Baby. But only the last 3 notes, over and over again, like someone's forgotten how the rest goes. Quirky tidbit. In 19th century London, it wasn't uncommon for people to write letters of reference for their pets, especially if those pets had occupational value. One famous tabby was described in an 1881 letter as a fierce guardian of sponge cakes, brave in the face of crumpet thieves and noble in spirit. The cat was hired. You tilt your head and watch clouds drift by, shaped like spoons, books, slippers, and one suspiciously like an otter wearing glasses. The scent of chamomile deepens. A fox in velvet breeches steps from behind a tree and places a steaming mug on the ground below your hammock. No words, just a nod. You sip. The tea is creamy and strange, like warm vanilla tangled with something herbaceous and sleepy. It tastes like finishing something long overdue. Down the orchard path, a group gathers under a tree shaped like a heart that forgot how symmetry works. A goat stands on a tree stump, reading from a crinkled scroll, and thus concluded the service of Rupert the Ferret, who was last seen balancing a spoon on his nose during Queen Victoria's coronation luncheon. Polite applause follows. Another voice reads next, Clara the Finch, who sang lullabies to factory workers at dawn. Many reported falling asleep while standing, a risk management disaster, but morale improved by 17%. This strange sleep ceremony of gratitude continues, and the air hums of appreciation for service, for silliness, for things done quietly and well. You close your eyes, not asleep yet, but just to listen deeper. Footsteps pass nearby. A soft ba. Someone whispers, that one nap for crown. A tap on your hammock. A small note handed to you by a lemur in gloves. You are cordially invited to the closing parade of peculiar professions. Please bring your blanket and a sense of inner slipperiness. You raise an eyebrow. The lemur bows. You roll out a hammock, now entirely convinced that either A, you're hallucinating from goat cheese, or B, the Victorians were right, and everything about sleep and animals and strange jobs is far more magical than anyone gives credit for. You join the others on the path again. The parade is slow-moving, candlelit, and narrated by a stork in a waistcoat who speaks entirely in sleepy rhyming couplets. Behind him march donkeys with medals, mice holding ribbon hats, pigeons carrying scrolls, and even a goose wearing a crown made of lavender and onion skin. You walk alongside them, clutching your blanket, feeling honored and strange and light. You've never belonged to anything quite like this. But maybe you always have. Your steps now soft, careful not to disturb the slumbering alleyways of a city whose breath is long faded from a gaslight. You walk through so many odd little corners of Victorian London that even your dreams might need a map to keep up. But there's one more stop, tucked behind a crumbling confectioner's shop, where ivy has taken over like it paid rent, and the windows are more patchwork than glass. Inside, you find what was once the pet emporium of Wilhelmina Snipe, a name whispered only in half-truths and giggles at society parties. The door creaks like it hasn't opened in a century, and maybe it hasn't. Dust hangs in the air like lace, and the floorboards are bowed from time and secrets. And in the far corner, curled atop a velvet cushion beside a skeletal harp, is a ferret wearing a monocle. Okay, so technically not a living ferret, more of a very well-preserved taxidermy situation. This is a museum of failed Victorian pet jobs, an idea so specific it could only be birthed by the kind of person who also tried to teach ravens a harpsichord, which Wilhelmina did, several times. Each exhibit is stranger than the last. There's a hedgehog in a tiny apron once trained to serve biscuits at tea time. It mostly curled into a ball on the serving tray. A chinchilla labeled emergency confetti. Turns out, shaving them is frowned upon. And a parrot who allegedly testified in court, though it mostly just yelled, "He did it!" during every trial, regardless of context. But for all the absurdity, there's a certain tenderness here. These animals weren't exploited. They were adored, spoiled, and dressed in outfits more expensive than most tailors could afford. Their jobs weren't chores. They were identities, stitched lovingly by people who believe in the healing power of companionship, whimsy, and a bit of cheese-flavored dignity. Mainstream historical fact. In late Victorian London, eccentric pet ownership was often a social statement, and many animals were given roles in their owners' businesses or households, whether or not they were remotely qualified. Pigs in parlors, goats as unofficial therapists, and pigeons that allegedly delivered marriage proposals. The success rate was debatable. Quirky tidbit. One documented case involved a goose named Percival who worked as a wake-up bird in a boarding house, honking precisely at 6:45 a.m. by pecking a metal bell with militaristic precision. Until, of course, he retired to a life of quiet honking in Hyde Park after being replaced by a wind-up clock. Historians still argue whether this era's obsession with pet labor was a response to industrial loneliness, or just another reflection of how Victorians tried to dress up grief in collars and Sunday bonnets. And maybe it doesn't matter, because here, in this forgotten little corner of London's fuzzy underbelly, you feel something warm, a quiet sort of legacy, not in monuments or battles, but in fur-lined hats and squeaky harnesses. A tribute not to what pets did, but what they meant. You kneel to brush dust from a plaque that reads, "To all the beasts who work without ever being asked to, thank you for showing us how to be softer." And maybe that's the point in the end, that for all the fog and coal and corsets 2 sizes too small, the people of Victorian London still carved out space for love, for laughter, for the small, absurd joy of watching a rabbit pretend to guard a jewelry case. You step back outside and the street is still. The city, both the one you've walked through and the one inside you, feels a little more whole. The stars above blink sleepily. A nearby cat yawns. And now, let's wind things down. You've traveled through soot and velvet, snored beside hedgehogs, and watched cheese-related justice unfold in dim-lit drawing rooms. But now the rhythm slows. Your breathing softens. The city's strange little heart has quieted to a murmur, and your limbs are wrapped in the warmth of remembered whimsy. Let your thoughts drift like fog over the Thames, gentle, shapeless, and untethered. The strange, charming world of forgotten pets and their peculiar callings will wait for you. No rush. You're allowed to wander there any time the waking world gets too sharp around the edges. Close your eyes. Let go of the weight in your shoulders. Let that last soft chuckle from the ferret in the top hat echo one final time. The gas lamps of the mind dim now, one by one. You're safe. You're home. You're asleep.